I mean, that was
That's gotta be, I don't know, 4.3-ish? I'll take a 5.
I don't know. Yeah.
So we've talked about Warlocks for DPS, and we'll get back to them soon again later. We've talked about Titans for DPS in episode 2. Today, it's time to talk about Hunters for this episode, for a DPS loadout. Now, while Thunder Crash is bugged and doing silly damage, plus the artifact bonus allows you to do more damage with arc abilities, that's going to stay number 1 for this episode, but I imagine once this episode is over, Hunters will probably go back to being at least the most consistent damage dealers in the game, if not number 1 in total for damage. That is partially due to the fact that Hunters have one of the most consistent damage combos out there, that being the pair of Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun with Still Hunt. Despite the massive nerf that Still Hunt got with the interaction with Goldie, it still pumps out fantastic damage even post-nerf, and even after that did happen, we also got a nerf to Star Eaters on the exotic class items, which means Nova Bomb and Twilight Arsenal both suffered from that nerf to bring their damage down a little bit further as well. So Still Hunt and Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun are the same, but what's different for this episode? Well, there's a couple of things. First, there's the nerfs that Bungie made to both Reconstruction and Auto-Loading Holster, which just makes them take longer to proc, which makes your damage suffer in turn. And there's also the bug to Envious Assassin, where if you do a certain interaction this season, it just ruins your Envious stacks, which kind of ruins the whole purpose of the perk. This has made rockets a lot less viable to a lot of people, and has made grenade launchers the overwhelming favorite in the heavy slot, and given that they've released 3 grenade launchers to farm in this episode, that kind of makes them the unanimous choice to use in the heavy slot anyway. There's also a new artifact perk in the game this episode, which allows us to not only weaken enemies on our own if we want to, but also there's a boost to this artifact mod, which lets us automatically reload stowed weapons anytime you hit an enemy with a grenade launcher. So we're going to take the concussive reload artifact mod and then combine it with everything we just mentioned previously and cook up some damage phase rotations. For the weapons loadout here, we're going to be locking in 2 weapons, the kinetic and energy slot specifically, and then the third slot, the heavy slot, is going to be interchangeable depending on what you can get your hands on. The kinetic slot is going to Lost Signal, the aerial denial GL that you can get from the first episode of this expansion, which allows us to weaken the bosses like I mentioned earlier and reload our stowed weapons, while also having auto-loading holster on this GL, as well as Vorpal or One For All, depending on what you want to do in which activity. This way, you can weaken the bosses, you can reload all your weapons, and then swap off this weapon without having to manually reload that, and then come back to it whenever you need it to reapply the exact same scenario again. The second slot is of course going to be Still Hunt for its massive DPS potential with Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun, and then finally in our heavy slot, the main culprit is going to be VS Chill Inhibitor, as it's unanimously the best GL in the game currently, as long as you can get the God rolls anyway. But you can also swap this out for the other 2 good GLs from this episode, which are either Wicked Sister, which you can get from the Vanguard, or Bittersweet, which you can get from Tonics and just playing Onslaught. Chill Inhibitor can roll Cascade Point plus Bait and Switch, or Bait and Switch plus one of the new perks in the game, Envious Arsenal, which is essentially reverse Bait and Switch, where you fire off your heavy shots, then switch back to your other 2 weapons, fire them, and then go back to your heavy, and then your mag will be automatically reloaded. And speaking of that perk, Wicked Sister and Bittersweet can both roll Envious Arsenal Bait and Switch to complement your heavy slot if you can't get a good Chill Inhibitor, or you can't beat the dungeon to get the free one from Banshee on November 19th. We'll get back to the rotation in a second, but I wanted to cover the abilities for this first. So we're going to be on Prismatic Hunter rather than regular Solar Hunter to utilize our Golden Gun. That way you're doing 5% more bonus damage for your weapons while you have Transcendence active, so the kit is going to be centered around trying to get that as fast as possible for your damage phases. That said, let's talk about the abilities. So our super is of course going to be Golden Gun, nothing needs to be explained there. In our regular abilities, we have Marksman's Dodge on in the event that you can't get your reload off from your tonic, so you have a backup plan here in the event that whatever weapon you're using needs to be reloaded instantly rather than just standing there and manually doing it. Then we have Snare Bomb in our melee for a weaken effect, plus also giving us Radiant whenever we hit a target as well. That'll be included in the Fragments. And then in our grenade, we have Dust Field Grenade, just to freeze enemies, affect them with stasis, which also plays into the Fragments, and also build some extra darkness meter if you didn't already get it full from your Lost Signal. For the aspects, we have Winter Shroud. That's pretty standard for Hunters. I don't think that needs a lot of detail on that. And then for our second one, we have Ascension. This is basically here specifically to help you build your light meter for your Prismatic, because this kit currently has a whole lot of dark going for it, but not a whole lot of light unless you swap out something like Lost Signal for a light-based energy weapon to build off of that. But aside from that, Ascension is your go-to. For fragments, there are 6 of them. As always, not all of them are completely mandatory. Some of them are must-haves, others you can replace if you'd like. Personal preference. Here we go. The first one is arguably the most important one, Facet of Courage. This allows you to increase the damage of your light abilities when a target is affected with a darkness debuff. So when you hit anything with stasis, such as with your dodge, or if you happen to have a choke clip weapon on, like Riptide, this instantly will improve the damage of your golden gun. Normally, the easiest way to accomplish this is to just throw either your dust field before you go prismatic, or in prismatic, hit your prismatic grenade, and eventually it'll freeze and shatter the boss that you threw it at. Second is going to be Facet of Protection, a staple. While you're surrounded, you're more resistant to incoming damage, and when you're transcended, the effect is increased. Pretty straightforward. Number 3 is Facet of Command. This is a bonus way to reload weapons other than the previously mentioned ones already. So when you freeze or suppress a target, it'll automatically reload your equipped weapons. In this case, again, it's either a dust field freezing something or your prismatic grenade freezing and shattering a boss. That gets a free reload, but be aware that this has a large cooldown, so you might want to try to time it later in a damage phase. Fourth is Facet of Dawn. Powered melee hits on targets make you radiant. So this matters because Radiant is directly tied to increasing the damage of Golden Gun when you're not standing inside of a well of Radiance. And FYI, you can get in a well and then step out of it to also become Radiant and still get the bonus damage of Golden Gun if, for whatever reason, you don't want to run Facet of Dawn. Next is Facet of Grace. This is a little bit tricky. So this is used to get bonus Transcendent Energy to get your Priz faster while using a kinetic weapon. Now, obviously, I didn't mention a kinetic weapon earlier, but what you can do with this is essentially, if you want to start with something else instead of Lost Signal before a boss damage phase, let's say something like a Pulse Rifle, I don't know, Blast Furnace, right? And use that to build up your Priz quickly instead of just utilizing Ascension and then spamming Lost Signal, which you could also do if you'd like, up to you. But ideally, what you would do is abuse that, and then once you've built up your Priz energy to max, you can put Lost Signal back on, and then utilize Special Finisher, which is going to be on our class item. Use that to make a green brick, and then you'll have Lost Signal ammo going into a boss damage phase. This is completely optional, though. Not mandatory. If you want to just stick with the other loadout, that's totally fine, too. You can change this fragment for something else. Lastly, we have Facet of Ruin. This increases the size and the burst damage of a shatter, either from a crystal or a frozen target, and also increases the area effect of a solar ignition. It's not really mainly here for ignitions, it's mainly for the shattering portion, and given that ignitions are kind of bugged right now, and multiple ignitions do less and less damage on a target, that's not really the focal point. So if you want extra bonus shatter damage, put this on. If not, swap it out for something else that you'd like instead. Now, as for the rotation, then we'll get into mods. There's a couple of things to keep in mind when you're doing your rotations on a boss. First off, it depends which boss you're starting on. For example, if you're starting on a boss like the Witness, then you might be able to just apply some sort of stasis debuff on the Witness first before firing a Goldie to get the bonus damage. Other bosses might have a short damage phase window where you just want to get your Goldie off immediately and then go straight into your weapons without having to set up the stasis debuff, unless, you know, somebody else on your team is doing it. Then either way, it's fine. And then you want to go into your weapon rotation and always try to keep the same order going in your weapons so nothing goes out of whack, out of order, and then you lose that on a reload or something like that. So initially, to start a damage phase, what you want to do is go ahead and prep right before the damage phase starts by activating your Still Hunt, then your Priz, and then your Goldie. Or you could also just do Priz, Still Hunt, then Goldie. The main reason for this is because if you do them back to back to back, you're canceling the full animations of the first two things that you're doing instead of having the full animation play out and just wasting extra time in a damage phase where you could be doing more damage. So ideally, I go Still Hunt, then activate Priz immediately after, which cancels most of the Still Hunt animation, then immediately activate Goldie, which cancels the later half of the Priz animation, and now I'm off to the races for damage. At that point, you could fire off your Goldie, or throw your melee and your nade, in this case, Smoke and Priz nade, and then fire off Goldie, then you go straight to your weapons. So you would start with Lost Signal, or whatever you want to use in that slot, if for some reason you're not using Lost Signal, then go into your Still Hunt, shoot your Still Hunt shot. Don't worry, you will still have the Cade's shot ready to go. There's a big timer on it. It doesn't go away if you swap weapons. And then lastly, you go into your Chill Inhibitor, or your Bittersweet, or your Wicked Sister. Now, if you're using Chill Inhibitor with Cascade Point, you would have to fire the Cade shot and hit a headshot with that, and then fire an additional second shot of Still Hunt before switching to Chill Inhibitor to proc Cascade Point. FYI, if you're using a rapid-fire sniper, it's 3 shots, but for Still Hunt, it's 2. Once your heavy ammo is depleted, then you start your rotation again. You go back to Lost Signal, which will then be fired at the boss to weaken them if you're solo, or otherwise it'll just reload your stowed GL with the Concussive Reload Tonic. Then you go back to Still Hunt. Now, here, like I mentioned, you only need 2 shots to proc Cascade for Chill Inhibitor if you have that on, but you could also fire maybe like 3 shots of Still Hunt to try to get back to your next Kate shot for Still Hunt before going to your heavy slot GL and then firing all the ammo there again. By the way, good thing to point out is that in a long damage phase, your Prisonade will probably proc command at some point while you're firing your heavy shots. If you happen to get your full mag back while you're still in the process of firing your first one, just keep firing off until you hit 0 shots to go back to your other 2 weapons. As for your reload dodge in this equation, you can do one of 2 things. You can either hold your dodge in the event that your tonic reload doesn't pop off for whatever reason, and then you have an emergency backup there, or what you could do is do your first rotation, and when you get to your heavy ammo and you used all 8 shots, you can instantly use your dodge there to get another 8 shots off before going back to redoing your rotation with Lost Signal, Still Hunt, etc. If done early enough in the rotation, you should get your dodge back a second time before your prismatic runs out, and you can hold that one then in case of emergency. Finally, let's close this out with mods. The only artifact mod you should be worried about for this build is the Concussive Reload mod. That's it. Every other artifact mod is completely optional, and whatever you want to do with that is up to you. Now for armor mods, I'm going to go into the more specific ones that I think you should have on. The full list will be included in the dim build if you want to try out the build, and that will be in the description below. Follow the socials while you're there, by the way. For your helmet, there's nothing really mandatory, but I will make 2 small recommendations. The first is going to be harmonic targeting for your Still Hunt, landing that headshot, you know, flinches a bitch and all that, so it doesn't hurt. And another one is going to be a Siphon mod, just to build armor charges in case you want to use that special finisher, or maybe you use their super early and you want to get back to a second one, or try to get back to a second one in something like the Corrupted Puppeteer. For gloves, I have Stasis Dexterity, Solar Dexterity, and then Bolstering Detonation. The Dexterity is just pretty straightforward, you know, ready and stow speed for those weapons, and then Bolstering Detonation is there for getting your class ability back when you cause damage with a grenade, in this case, your Prisonade. In your chest, typically, you either run Resists or Reserves, but in certain damage phases for bosses, you could run a mix of both. For example, if I know a boss only does solar damage, then I can stack up a Solar Resist mod and then put in 2 reserve mods to increase my ammo for Chill or Bittersweet or even Still Hunt. For my boots, I opted to go with a split weapon surge setup, so I have 2 stasis weapon surges on and then 1 solar weapon surge on to utilize some damage from Still Hunt with the big shot, and then the other 2 are of course for Chill Inhibitor. If it's Bittersweet for you, then it's obviously Arc Surge and then Wicked Sister, Strand Surge. And for class item, we have 3 mods here. The first one is Special Finisher for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. The second one is going to be Proximity Ward for when you go in for a finisher, you get an overshield just to ensure that you survive. And then lastly, we have Time Dilation to increase the timer on your armor charges for prolonged damage phases where you need to keep them up for your surges as long as possible. And that's the build. Hunters still do absurd damage despite the massive nerf to Still Hunt, and I highly doubt they're going to be getting another nerf anytime soon. Now here's a bonus question. Would you guys be interested in seeing a DPS setup for Hunters that does not include Still Hunt? Let me know in the comments below if that is the case. Other than that, if you enjoyed the video or the build, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and or comment below as well. If you don't know what to comment, you can leave Hunters as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.